You're that person when people say, I think my kid has a disability, and it's your job to figure out whether or not they do and whether or not they qualify for special ed services.
I have a resource in my office that's called 50 medical conditions that look like ADHD. I would like to share for those neurotypical who are listening. You will never understand us. We will never make sense. But just know we're doing the best we can.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the ADHD Eavesdrop, where you can be a butterfly on the wall and listen in on my conversations. Today, we have one of my favorite people in the whole world, Kevin Seale. Kevin and I have known each other since 2011 when he started as a psychologist at the high school, where I was the department head, and we worked together for several years in a lot of different capacities in Kalamazoo. And I know like Kevin even left for a couple of years and came back. He's worked in elementary, he's worked in middle school, he's worked in high school, he's worked in Indiana and in Michigan with kiddos with special needs. Kevin's going to join me today and talk about IEPs, 504s, all the school related stuff that goes with having ADHD as a kiddo. And to add to that, Kevin himself also is a late diagnosed ADHDer, just like I am. We were diagnosed really fairly closely together. Kevin was diagnosed first. He talked to me about it eventually, and I came around that we both had it. So I'm just so excited, and it's obvious I'm excited because I'm just like talking away that Kevin is with me finally for this interview because I've been asking him for a really long time. So, Kevin, my friend, I'm so happy to have you. Welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
How do we create those atmospheres or those things that our ADHD kiddos in the United States need to be successful in school? And you are an expert in that area as you're that person when people say, I think my kid has a disability, and it's your job to figure out whether or not they do and whether or not they qualify for special ed services. So tell me about that when it comes to ADHD, how that kind of unfolds.
Well, in the United States, we have a lot of things that we can do to help students. Um, there are there are two laws that create programs that are used to help students. These two programs would be Individuals with Education Act, which makes the provision for special education services, and then there is
The
the
IDEA, right?
IDEA. Yep. Um, and then there is the Section 504 of the Americans with Disability Act,
ADA.
which is the ADA. So these two laws drive a lot of the interventions that take place in school because they're legally mandated to be followed. Now, the thing about ADHD is while having ADHD is you either have it or you don't, the effect that ADHD has upon a person varies wildly. There are people who forget everything. I'm one of those people. It's reached to the point where I'm doing something and my 6-year-old says, but daddy, you need to because I'd forgotten. And that's just what happens.
Halfway
Stop.
midstream. You're thinking a thought and you forget it, right?
I'm walking out the house. Somebody asked me a question. I put down my phone, answer the question, walk out the house, drive 5 miles down the road. Where's my phone? Because my routine was altered. I put it down. I forgot. These are type of things that happen with more. We call them impairments. The difficulty with organizing themselves, being aware of their surroundings, being aware of themselves. Students with who have a lot of difficulty making decisions maintaining focus for a long period of time, knowing how to start a task, knowing how to stop doing a task. These skills can be very impaired or slightly impaired. So what ends up happening is we end up with kind of a three-tier model in schools for dealing with kids with ADHD. At the very bottom is what we call universal accommodations. Universal accommodations are things that every teacher, every administrator, every staff member in the school do for all students. So, for example, one of the things that may be beneficial for a student with ADHD is if the school has, say, tutoring after school. It's open to everybody. That might be a good thing to take hold of because when you have ADHD, your brain disappears and takes walks whenever it feels like. So you will miss instruction. That's a guarantee. So tutoring tries to fill those holes. So, but that would be an example of a universal accommodation. Other types of universal accommodations would be having the teacher seat your child in a place that's not busy or close to the teacher. So the teacher can provide that external structure for the student. Those are what most schools will provide to all students. This works for a lot of kids with mild ADHD. Now, for students who have a little bit more impairment, the next tier would be what we would use a 504 accommodation. A 504 accommodation is part of the ADA, and the entire law relating to 504 accommodations is exactly one sentence long. Um, it makes it very difficult to try and fit things into, but based on how courts have ruled in the past, we have a general indication of how we can use it. So basically, what happens in a 504 is the student has to be shown to have a disability. That's the first part. That affects a major life function. That's the second part. And adversely affects their ability to function in that environment. Okay. The 504 rule means that it can be put in place in school and it can follow them through their life. So the thing about a 504 plan is you just have to suspect. This is where things get murky. For several years, schools required legal documentation of ADHD to say your child has ADHD. This qualifies as a disability, yada, yada, yada. However, some rulings that have gone through have actually indicated that you do not actually need the documentation for a 504 to be put into place. I say this with a huge caveat. It is in your best interest as a parent, as a guardian, to have that documentation.
Well, not only that, but ADHD is a medical diagnosis. So it really is something that should be diagnosed outside of the school or has to be diagnosed outside of
Has to
school.
be diagnosed outside of the school. Schools will never diagnose your child with ADHD. That being said, I know it happens where teachers tell parents, I think your child has ADHD. He can't stay still. That happens. It's not good, but it happens. If that happens, that doesn't mean your child has ADHD. It means this teacher sees behaviors that they assume is ADHD. I have a resource in my office that's called 50 medical conditions that look like ADHD. This
Mm,
is why it's very important. If you suspect your child has ADHD, pursue that through a medical doctor.
absolutely. And I mean, like depression, trauma, anxiety, OCD, all those comorbidities don't necessarily mean that you have ADHD, but it's always a chicken before the egg. Which one is separate, it gets really complicated.
It gets extraordinarily complicated. 504 plans allow you to ask for accommodations. Now, what is an accommodation? An accommodation is something that we do for a student that's different, but you're not changing anything about what is being taught or how it's being tested.
Mhm.
So, for example, extended time, where a student gets more time than a non-disabled peer because it takes them longer to produce written work or to do academic tasks. That's an example of an accommodation. Another accommodation would be a student may have a pass to go to the bathroom because they've got a medical disorder that they have to go to the bathroom multiple times a day. That would be an example of another accommodation. Um, Depending on the school and depending on the state, there are other things that can fit into a 504 that don't fly in other states. So it's best to talk with the school to find out what type of things typically are accommodated. The highest level of support is special education. Now, special education is a whole law. It's got sections, it's got all sorts of stuff. It's got definitions, it's got, trust me, it's a big thing. So it's a lot more descriptive and prescriptive than a 504 plan. So because of that, there are several more steps in the process to get an IEP, which is what most people call special education. IEP is the document that describes the special education services.
Individualized education plan.
That is right. So for an for special education, the first thing that needs to happen is that the child's legal guardian makes a request for special education services. Not an uncle, a doctor, not a therapist,
What,
not
you
a
mean the doctor can't write a
psychologist.
prescription for an IEP?
No, 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 no,
They can't. I just want
no.
to make that really clear right now. A doctor
Yes.
cannot prescribe an IEP.
A doctor can also not prescribe a 504.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Now, can a
A doctor may
teacher?
recommend,
Yes,
they can recommend, but they cannot prescribe it.
right. And can a teacher recommend or ask for an evaluation for an IEP of a student of
Yes,
theirs?
a teacher may request a special education evaluation. However, the school will not go ahead with that evaluation until they receive consent from the parent. And when I say the parent, I should say the legal guardian, which may or may not be the parent.
Right.
So if you're thinking about special education, please be aware that the legal guardian is the only person outside of the school that can request a special education evaluation. Sometimes, and this happened to me this year, sometimes there is no legal guardian. And you may ask yourself, how is that possible? Believe it or not, sometimes a child may be orphaned and well-meaning family members say, I'll watch the kid. Great, the kid has a place to live and everybody stops. Unfortunately, that does not make you the legal guardian. That was kind of a tangent going on about legal guardianship, but wanted to make sure that that was clear.
Hey, this is
Um,
what this show is about. We love tangents.
so you request special education services and an evaluation takes place after consent is obtained from the parent. Timelines differ in states. One timeline that's pretty consistent in most states is after you request special education service, evaluation for special education, the school must respond within 10 days. Some states, that's 10 calendar days. Some states, it's 10 school days. It depends from state to state. Here in Michigan and in Indiana, it's 10 school days. Okay. And they need to respond to you to let you know whether they will or will not complete an evaluation. Wait a minute, Kevin. I just requested it. Don't the school have to do an evaluation? No. A rule of thumb that I use and several other people use is special education is designed for the most impaired individuals. So we are talking to individuals who perform at or below the 15th percentile. So if your student is passing all of his classes, gets all the work in on time, has no behavior issues, but he has ADHD, we're probably not going to do a special education evaluation because that level of support would not be appropriate.
And a kid who's doing that is not going to be in the bottom 15% of
Correct.
kiddos, right? So that's when you would bring in the 504 plan, right?
Because remember, I said it's three things.
Yes.
Is there a disability? ADHD is a disability. You got that already. Second one, does it impede a major life skill?
Hmm.
Well, what's a major life skill? Learning, reading, writing, caring for yourself,
Communicating.
communicating. There's a whole list.
Yes.
Sometimes that's hard to define,
Hmm.
especially with ADHD, because they are very intelligent kids with ADHD who actually can do the work, but emotionally they fall apart.
Hmm.
The pressure of doing the work and keeping themselves together is too much for their executive functioning and they fall apart.
Hmm.
So even though the child may be academically strong, they need assistance with dealing with their emotion. That's something that you could say we can do a 504 for. And then the third question, does it affect their functioning?
Hmm.
Not does it affect their grades? Does it affect their functioning? And I alluded to that just now when I talked about behavior. What is coming out more in the literature is that students with ADHD are at higher risk for developing emotional behavioral disorders
Hmm.
because with ADHD, it's not just your attention that's dysregulated, everything is dysregulated. Sleep, development, everything's dysregulated.
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind
So,
of makes me think about like I recently, within the last couple of years, discovered, and this made perfect sense to me, but it was just shocking to me to think about. So there's the physiological, biological ADHD, you've got it or you don't thing. And then you have the DSM, which is the the psychological definition for ADHD. And so you can physically have ADHD your whole life, but you might not always qualify under the DSM as having ADHD because it depends on whether or not it's affecting your life negatively.
exactly. And that is perfect re-explanation and an example of the difference between why you would want to do a 504, an IEP, special education, or nothing, because it depends on the impairment that it causes the child. If you have a child who physically cannot sit down, has an attention span of like 3 seconds, um, impulsively does unusual and bizarre things, if you ask for special education testing, you probably get it. It because that would definitely impair the person's function.
Right.
Now, after you request and the school gets back to you with their decision whether they're going to test or not, it is then you, the parent, the guardian's responsibility to sign for that evaluation. If you say you don't want the evaluation, that's done. If you say you want the evaluation would proceed. Then another timeline comes into effect. This timeline varies wildly. There are some states that say 30 calendar days for the evaluation to be completed. There are some states that say 30 school days. There are some states that say 60 school days. And I think there's a state that has 90 school days as their timeline. Case in point, Indiana is 60 school days. Michigan is 30 school days. So based on that, it's good to know that the evaluation has to be completed in this time. And you sit down at a meeting to decide whether or not your child qualifies for special education service. This is going to go into the law a little bit more than it needs to. There is no eligibility in special ed called attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. There is, however, a label called other health impairment. Other health impairment is separated from other medical disorders like physical impairment, blindness, those things that have specific eligibilities, and is kind of a lump haul for medical diagnoses that affect students, but aren't the big ones. So these include things like Downs, ADHD, Tourette's, and some of these other disorders. Now, things that we consider for ADHD is each state has a definition of what ADHD is considered. Now, remember what I said about 504s. It's not required, but definitely recommended to have medical documentation. Special ed's different. There are some states, like Indiana, that don't care. If they think you have ADHD, you qualify. There are other states like Michigan that in the law requires medical confirmation from a medical doctor.
And this is for the IEP, not the 504, right?
Correct. In Michigan and a few other states, a doctor has to sign off to say a student's strength, vitality, or awareness is affected by the ADHD. They will need access to your doctor, which means some sort of exchange of confidential information between the doctor and the schools, so that the schools can send the doctors usually a form to say, what is the diagnosis this child has? Does it impact the student? How does it impact the student? Is it chronic or is it short term? These things, that is something I need to make sure that people are aware of, is depending on the state you're in, they require medical documentations. So even if people have been telling you, oh, your child has ADHD for the last 15 years, and you're like, yep, my child has ADHD, but you don't have medical, that will not qualify the child, depending on the state you're in.
So are you essentially saying that if you suspect that your child has ADHD and you would like to get accommodations in the schools, that it's a good idea to get the diagnosis first, but it
Not
might,
essential, highly, strongly recommended.
it makes everything go so much smoother, doesn't it? If you have that.
Yeah, makes
And it gives
everybody's life
you
easier.
the ability then, once you have that diagnosis and you know for sure that your child has ADHD, then it also gives you other options like medication as well as plans at school that can really help that kiddo out. I just I know a lot of parents want to go directly to the school because that's what they're concerned about. They're like they're not doing well in school, so they go to the school and what do? Let's not forget about our medical doctors. We need to bring them into the mix as well.
Teachers are very willing to help. Sometimes doctors will say to a family that says, I think my child has ADHD, they may give the parent a paper that says it's a ADHD survey. Do not hesitate to ask your child's teachers to complete it.
Hmm.
Do not hesitate to complete it yourself. One of the things that I want to stick in here, it's kind of a pushpin that's a bit of a peeve for me. Very often in schools, I will hear, little Timmy only has a problem at school.
Hmm.
He is perfectly fine at home. This is a problem with the school. You guys figure it out. Or he's a terror at home. How is he now a terror at school? I have a adage when it comes to ADHD. The only consistent thing about ADHD is how inconsistent it is.
Mm-hmm. It changes all the time too. It just depends on what your stress level is, depends on your ability to cope, depends on
If you ate,
whether you're tired or
if
whether
you are
you're
hungry,
hungry. Exactly.
if the sun is shining.
Or not.
So that being the reason I bring this up is I want to let everybody know that no matter how you feel, how ideal you feel your home is for your child's development, there is a fundamental difference between home and school.
Hmm.
Expectations are vastly different. And because expectations are different, and students with ADHD have a hard time meeting expectations because they tend to forget what they're supposed to do, having to adjust to two wildly different systems sometimes causes a child to act in unusual or frightening ways. What do you do about that? Engage with the school to find ways that the school and the home can have similar expectations so that while it's not exactly the same, because it never will be, expectations for behavior, expectations for how you treat other people, expectations for how work is done, those type of expectations will lower some of the crazy behavior differences that occur in different places.
Mhm.
Now, getting back to IEPs. So now you have an IEP. You've decided, the team has talked about all the things, talked about all the things it isn't, talked about all the things it is, and you've made a decision. And you as a parent are part of that team. You need to make sure your voice is heard because it's your child.
Mhm.
When your child has an IEP, accommodations like in 504s are provided, but with an IEP, you have the ability to get what's called modifications. Modifications change the curriculum
Mhm.
in some way. Examples of modifications would be a reduction in number of math problems. Kinda. There's a way you can make that a modification. You can make that an accommodation.
Yeah, I was going to challenge you on that, but
There is a way to make that into an accommodation, but for making this not be a 3-hour podcast, let's just say that if you just take math homework and cut it in half, that is a modification.
yes, you have to be very selective about what half you're giving them in order to keep it as an accommodation.
Correct.
Yes.
Um, the having given the option to give your written report orally
Yes.
instead of handwritten, those are modifications. Some modifications are minor. Some modifications are very major and can actually affect the ability for your child to get a high school diploma.
Mhm.
Let that sink in. Special education has accommodations and modifications that, if applied, will affect your child's ability to get a general education high school diploma. That is how powerful an IEP is,
Mhm.
which is why if a child doesn't need all of that sledgehammer accommodations modifications, we would prefer to do more accommodations with a 504.
Right. And we don't even want to get, we're going to have to do another podcast because like I'm sitting here thinking personal curriculum, I'm thinking, which is a whole other thing that we could get into. So there are lots of things that we could continue to talk about. Um, so I, we're getting close to the end of our time, and we're having such a good conversation. I'm just wondering, can we kind of package this up into a nice little gift with a bow for people?
I can do better than that.
All right.
If you don't remember much because you have ADHD, remember this. You can get help in school if you have ADHD. First thing. Second thing, the flavor of help you get is dependent on how much the ADHD affects you. Thirdly, IEPs and 504s are programs that force schools and teachers to provide services to your child to help them access the general education curriculum. An IEP nor a 504 is to help your child get an A. That is not the purpose of it. It's the purpose of these things is to help your child be successful in spite of their disorder.
Awesome. And you when you say that that comment about it's not to help your student get an A, it it's about evening the playing field where they have an opportunity to be successful in school and function at their best ability. And so many times, yes, your child does have a disability when they have ADHD. Is it disabling enough to require a 504 plan? Is it enough disablement to require a special ed evaluation and IEP? Like you said, every kid is different. And some kids it's going to be absolutely they need the help, and other kids it's going to be, you know what? They're going to do okay right now. And that's when I was talking about like, so we're in third grade and we're functioning great. We've got our ADHD, where we need it. We're working it and we're fine. We hit high school and everything blows up and we hit our tipping point, and maybe now the DSM definition fits us, right? So if your child has been diagnosed with ADHD, it doesn't automatically mean that they're going to need services, right? But
That is correct.
they might need them at a different time, or they may never need them, or they may need them all the way through.
That is absolutely correct. There is ADHD is a wonderful disorder because it is one of the few medical disorders that has no physiological markers.
Unless you do an MRI and do like all kinds
Not
of
just an FR, you have to do a functional MRI.
a functional MRI, which not many doctors are going to do. Doesn't happen very often. It's more research-based stuff. So yeah, but you're right, and you can't see it. It doesn't look different, but it definitely is different. So, well, Kevin, I want to thank you. What a great conversation. Is there anything that is on your heart or in your mind that you just absolutely have to share with us today?
I would like to share for those neurotypical who are listening. You will never understand us. We will never make sense. But just know we're doing the best we can.
Mm.
And sometimes all we need is understanding. Kids with ADHD receive 5 times more negative feedback than non-disabled peers. That tears them down.
Mhm.
Please understand your child as best as you can and praise them when they do things right.
Mhm.
Because I promise you, without recognizing it, you're probably giving your own child more negative feedback than possible.
Okay. Great advice, Kevin. And I hope you agree to come back on the show again because we have great information and you have great information to share. And I just really love conversing with you.
I love it.
Awesome. So, for our butterflies on the wall, if you liked what you heard, if you like the content, don't forget to subscribe and like and all the good stuff. And let us know what you thought of the episode. Let us know if you have questions. I'm going to put in the comments or in the details, I'll put Kevin's information. And I have my information. I spent 30 years in education. I know a lot about it too. So feel free to contact us or put it in the comments. We're really interested in what you have to say. So thank you again, Kevin. You have a wonderful, wonderful weekend.
You too as well.
And for those butterflies on the wall, we'll see you next time.